You have, I think, the 5 major hyperscalers, spending over $1 trillion in the next couple of years investing in AI infrastructure. How do you solve for this 3 to 4 year window until the utilities show up? There's a lot of existing capacity within the U.S. today. The pivot point that you have is natural gas. Electricity just becomes more and more important.
The data center boom isn't waiting for the grid to catch up, which means a big old gap between power demand and infrastructure realities that's landing squarely on utilities. Today, we're digging into one potential solution. Welcome back to Power Perspectives. I'm Kinsey Grant Baker, and today we are talking about one of the most practical and timely solutions to a problem that is totally reshaping load forecasting, interconnection queues, and long-term planning across the energy industry: bridge power. Because data centers are being built faster than the grid can expand to power them, and the gap is creating real business risk for all stakeholders, not to mention unprecedented planning pressure for utilities. So can bridge power fix one of the grid's biggest challenges? We're going to find out. I am thrilled to welcome Jim Smith, president of PowerSecure, as today's guest. Jim and the team at PowerSecure are working directly at this intersection of the data center boom and the infrastructure challenges that boom brings. They're deploying natural gas microgrids that let data centers come online years before utility service might be ready. They then can keep those same assets working as long-term resiliency and flexibility resources after interconnection is complete. And to note, today's episode is brought to you by PowerSecure, so make sure that you stick around to hear a little bit more about the innovative work that the team is doing later on in this episode. And now, if you are a utility professional trying to make sense of the pressure data center developers are under and what it means for your planning process, this conversation is for you. So let's get into it. Jim, welcome to Power Perspectives. How are you today?
Hey, good morning. Thanks, Kinsey. Great opening, great overview. You answered a lot of questions.
Well, thank you very much. I'm excited to dig into some more because I think we've got a lot more to uncover here and a lot of really interesting conversation to get to. So let's start here with a little bit maybe of an introduction, a little bit more on the background of some of the work that you and the team do. Can you tell me a little bit more about how you got involved with PowerSecure, and then just maybe the high level of what you and your team are doing to serve the utility sector at this, I think unprecedented is a word that we throw around a lot, but certainly feels like an unprecedented moment in sort of the history of utilities. Tell me a little bit more about what that work looks like for you and your team.
Yeah, so a little bit of background on me from a high level. Engineering by degree, spent a number of years working in commercial and industrial facilities, plants, buildings, and then it took a spin, working, directly with the utilities for a number of years. So, between the combinations of those experiences, we joined, joined forces with PowerSecure in 2013. So, 12, 13 years in now. With that experience, bringing to PowerSecure, the distributed microgrid business that PowerSecure is known for. So, when you reflect back on the 25 years of the company, we've always been doing this. I joked with an audience a couple of weeks ago on the West Coast that it was a platform there on DERs, bridge power, all the things we're talking about today. And it's like, I could reflect back not many years ago that I'd probably had to pay folks or give them free lunch to show up, right? And today we fast forward and we got 400 to 500 folks tacked in to listen to some of the same things that we're going to talk about today. So from PowerSecure, we've been doing this, right? I mean, you said it, it's like, whether we call it a gold rush or the next industrial revolution of everything that we're trying to do to support AI, we feel that we've built and we are building for, solving this problem. So look forward to talking more about it today.
Yeah, absolutely. And same here. I think that this context, this idea that the work that you're doing is rooted in years of having done it in different shapes and forms and ways is really important to start with. A lot of what we're going to talk about today, the reason we're talking about bridge power today is because we are seeing this huge spike in grid congestion, which is leading to, we're talking, multi-year interconnection delays. That is just the reality today. Obviously, the data center conversation is a huge part of all of this. So tell me a little bit more from your perspective of maybe what's driving, in addition to some of those key themes and factors there, what's driving this mismatch between what we might call kind of the demand realities and the infrastructure realities. Can you contextualize that at all? Can you give us a little bit more color on what that kind of mismatch looks like when we're looking at supply and demand right now?
There's a number of things that, as we look at it from our business, that have contributed to it, but the data center AI boom, I would call it, has just really catapulted the load and the utility shortcomings, right, in terms of transmission and generation, that where it's a major problem now. I mean, but when you look at, when we think about electricity needs, whether it's EV or reshoring or more industrialization here in the U.S., all the needs now, the data center. I mean, electricity just becomes more and more important, right, and needs to be more and more resilient every day. So now you add on these gigawatts. When you think back from the utility perspective, most of the utility sector was probably flat to very small incremental growth each year, right? Think about energy efficiency and, different parts of the country. It didn't move around much really. It was kind of stagnant, right? So now you went from a utility industry that's used to been managing in that environment to unprecedented, to use the word earlier, right, growth. I mean, when you look at all the billions, and I think I read a piece last week, you have I think the 5 major hyperscalers, spending over $1 trillion in the next couple of years investing in AI infrastructure. And then you look at the major utilities I use around the country, the billions and billions they're spending trying to, support that need to utility infrastructure. It's just a conflux of events here that's like, oh my gosh, what do we do?
Right. And the oh my gosh, what do we do? I think is where we're finding ourselves increasingly on this show and conversations that we're having on Energy Central is how do we ensure that those shortcomings that you mentioned in terms of transmission and distribution are not the limiting factor of what could be crazy economic growth and industry growth and all sorts of potential and opportunities for energy, knowing that electricity really is at the core of ensuring that we have this, prosperous future with all sorts of really cool and interesting technology. I would love to hear what you think when you're kind of considering maybe how utilities and utility leaders should be thinking about or understanding or trying to potentially sympathize with some of the pressure that the data center developers might be under when they can't wait years for grid access, right? They're talking about how do we fix this now? This is a problem that's moving really quickly. All of this conversation around speed to power plays a huge role in this as well. What do you think the thinking is for utility professionals these days when they're trying to consider the position that some of those developers might be in?
I think over the past 12 months, I would say that it's real, right? It's settled in that, when you look at all the requests that have been made to, public utility commissions and stuff around the country by utilities, that it's like they need to invest. The demand is here. It's real. So one, I think that's been established. Two, they will solve for it, right? I mean, they will build generation. I mean, we think transmission and transmission congestion is as big as a problem as a generation, probably a harder fix than the generation. We can speak a little bit more about that. But thirdly, what do we do in this 3 to 10 year period? And that varies a little bit around the country based on which utility you talk about. But the team shared some information with me earlier this week that, on average, we about 60% of the utilities are, about 60% of the hyperscalers out here have a need for a 3 to 4 year window. It's like, how do you solve for this 3 to 4 year window until the utilities show up? And we've also learned, it's like, look, the hyperscalers have plenty to focus on other than being a utility, right? They would rather work with the utility, right? So we know that at the point that the utility shows up, it's like, what do we do with these bridge assets that we call it, that we'll talk about, right? That's where we've spent a lot of time of, how do we do it? But I think the 3 to 4 year problem that we can solve is, I think what I've seen happen more over probably the past 3 to 6 months is all the stakeholders coming together to collaboratively figure out how we solve for this. And I think prior to that, it was like, different stakeholders had different paths, different lines that they were going down. And I think it finally got to the point, if we're going to solve for this, we all have to work together to solve it. So I see more of that happening. And then the second thing, there's flexibility within the system, the utility system, that with some of the capacity programs that we see back to the transmission problem. I mean, if we provide a bridge product and a resiliency product that helps solve some of these peak conditions, there's a lot of capacity there that can be unlocked in the existing utility system. So, we've really tried to focus on those couple of avenues to help support, the utilities and the data centers with, how we serve them today.
Yeah, I think this is a great moment to get in a little bit more deeply on the idea of what bridge power is, and maybe get the explainer here from you here, your perspective on this. This idea that we can come up with solutions that help to solve this problem of the next 3 or so years, as you mentioned, waiting for utility power. Tell me a little bit more about how bridge power factors into that. What is it? Why does it work? Why should we know about this? What should we know about this at the highest level? I would love to hear the sort of intro, the 101 on bridge power and why it fits as a solution to this challenge that we're talking about today.
First and foremost, they'd rather work with their local utility, right? But for all the things that we just talked about, whether it's 3 years, 5 years, or 10 years on when they think utility power will be available, it's like, well, what do we do in the interim? And there's the second thing, once they've established that the utility is some 3 to 10 year time frame away, the next question is that from a bridge power, the only pivot point that you have is natural gas. So the utility's not available. We next move into, okay, where can we site a data center that has natural gas availability? And not a little bit, right? But a lot of natural gas. And we're just saying, if you don't have natural gas available, you really just can't permit any other solution. So it's like, as you kind of, utilities years away, you got to have natural gas. So then it's like, you really have to think about it, the solution set of being natural gas driven. So whether you read about fuel cells being deployed, or large combined cycle turbines, or the smaller recip solutions that we're proposing, they're, what we see there is predominantly natural gas. So you got to have gas. So, once you've established that natural gas availability, we really like working with the utility. I mean, the utility's already vetted the hyperscaler, has load ramps, and have a good amount of information about what the end user of the hyperscaler would like to see. So at that point, our solution, again, you're seeing fuel cells deployed, right? You're seeing, larger turbines. Some of those are, 10-year solutions. I mean, you're completely islanded, no utility, right? I mean, that is an islanded solution. Questions can be had about, like, well, what do you do with those assets when the utility shows up? I mean, we've spent X dollars, right? I mean, what do we do? And that's something we can come back to. We looked at the problem of being, because in most cases it's stranded. I mean, maybe the utility commits to being some type of grid resource. Maybe they don't, but you got a resource now that you spent a lot of capital on that, once the utility shows up, what do you do with it? From our perspective, we wanted something that fit what we do today, going back how we started, the credibility of the 3 gigawatts that we have and the 3,000 sites that we've, designed, installed, and built. How do we leverage that platform that we have, to go out into a market with a solution? We brought to market a small modular, what we call Bridge Plus solution. That solution is a small natural gas driven recip engine, modular in fashion, just like, all of our other modularity products that we do. And the mindset is that this is a 3 to 4 year fix. I mean, it's not a 10-year fix. I mean, that's not what this product is intended to do. But, we see a lot of need in between late 27, early 28, out into the 2031, 2032 period, that, the utilities investments are showing up. They've got generation. They're starting to bring, utility power to these locations. So at that point, we've provided utility power. We've been the utility with these natural gas small bridge power assets. The plus piece is that when utility shows up, we pivot these assets now to be a resiliency asset. So they have the same inherent design characteristics that all of our products today have. Right? Remember, PowerSecure was built on resiliency, built on recip engines, built on the switchgear that we design and build every day. Right? So now we just repurpose that engine so there's no stranded capital by the hyperscaler. So utility shows up, we serve that need in the interim. When they do show, now we pivot these assets to be a resiliency to meet their 4.9 or 5.9 design requirements that most data centers require for uptime.
Yeah, I think this is a very, very good primer. Thank you, Jim, to start with kind of understanding the need and just the rundown of how this works, the sort of playbook that you're running here with this bridge power. You mentioned that after that 3 or so year period, after which this sort of, natural gas powered behind the meter microgrid adjacent kind of asset can then transition into something that becomes more of a resiliency asset. I'm curious how that might differ from something like our more traditional understanding of backup generation. What makes it different there? What makes it a great resiliency asset after that 3 year period has passed?
No, very good question. So, when we think about resiliency at PowerSecure, I mean we're thinking about all the the block loading requirements to kind of keep it simple on when there is an outage or there is an issue, right? That we can take control of that site in seconds, right? I mean other assets are just not designed that way. It doesn't mean it's bad. It's just like if you've got a simple cycle or combined cycle turbine, whatever size it is, it's like it takes a little bit to get it warmed up and going, right? So it's like there's a lot of a delay there of trying to get that top asset up to be a resiliency asset. The same for a fuel cell. In our opinion, fuel cells are a lot, built more for prime power applications than being, on a standby to be a resiliency asset. So that's the needle that we're threading, right, with the smaller natural gas recips that we design here.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm curious to hear too, in conversations that you're having with regard to threading that needle, which is, it's a specific and I'm sure challenging but very gratifying needle to thread indeed. What do the conversations look like with utilities when they're thinking about, bridge power with regard to planning and strategizing? How does it kind of factor into the longer term look that they're trying to get of what a utility business looks like? Do you see this as something that's more of like a workaround, a partner, a tool, a planning tool? Tell me a little bit about what that relationship looks like with utilities when we're talking about this bridge power as an asset in the future.
I think most of them see it more as a collaborative partnering way. I come at it from a point that I was speaking at a panel. It's like I think it's on all of us to figure this out. I mean, whether it's the utilities or the any other stakeholders that are trying to serve the need of the data centers, and the AI growth. It's like, why would we not want that intellectual capital here? So to me, I really put the pressure back on all of us that we need to come together and figure this out and support it. I mean, I kind of feel like it's an arms race that we need to win. We very much approach it with the utilities, and I think they see it the same way. It's like, look, if we can provide, going back to the 25 years we've been doing this, utilities have always been our partners. So when you talk about the interconnection queue and all these things, right, that are a problem, I mean, PowerSecure has done thousands and thousands of interconnect agreements with hundreds and hundreds of utilities. So we're very much a trusted partner, very established, right, in doing that. So, and have a lot of credibility with the utilities. So one, I think that gives us a leg up. Two, it's, for them, it's like if we can have an asset that maybe can be a capacity resource and a resiliency resource for them years later, while most importantly, I think, keeping this load in their service territory, why would they not want to be collaborative in the approach?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think it's this attitude of it makes so much sense, right? Why would we not want this to be part of what we're bringing to the table here? I'm curious how that might fit in with other technology, other sort of grid modernization technology that might be of interest. Just something that I think we've talked about a lot on the show recently is batteries and how battery integration kind of fits into the bigger picture of building this modern grid. I'm curious about how the bridge power assets that we're talking about today might collaborate with fit with or not, some of these other what we would call like grid mod technologies. Tell me a little bit about what that might look like.
When you think about it from a bridge power perspective, I mean, there's just nothing that batteries can help solve from a bridge plus perspective. I mean, from a bridge power perspective, right? I mean, you're looking at a natural gas driven, long term generating asset. Now where we are seeing batteries be, we're seeing from a resiliency perspective, we're seeing batteries be a lot more of the microgrids that we're deploying today. From a data center perspective, that dovetails in somewhat here into what we're talking about. I mean, we do have a product that we call it a UBES system for short, right? But it's a uninterruptible battery energy storage system, and we are using batteries, inverters, with gear that we make here to solve some of the utility problems that we have just around with these AI load spikes. So we do have a product that can be deployed with our Bridge Plus product that we call the AI smoothing. So we are seeing the product come to market to where it's just these hundreds of megawatts of swings that are happening in milliseconds can, irregardless of the generating asset or the utility, can just wreak a lot of havoc. So there had to be a solution to solve for that, specifically around AI loads. So we have that product that we brought to market here, and the batteries are part of that solution. And we are seeing customers think about, okay, if we're making this investment here for the AI smoothing, what can we do with the batteries from a resiliency perspective? So we are starting to see we're adding 2 to 4 hour batteries to that product so that it can be a shorter term resiliency play. Not really so much on, anything from a bridge power perspective, but more back from a resiliency perspective, and then using batteries as a storage asset that we're using all around the country. Doesn't really fit as just kind of a standalone bridge power product.
Yeah, helpful to know where that kind of factors in. When we're thinking about some of the inputs to the technology that we're talking about today with bridge power, you mentioned the availability of natural gas being a big factor here when we're talking about a natural gas powered piece of technology. Is there any challenge in natural gas being, what this is sort of based on, right? Like, tell me a little bit more about some of the challenges or opportunities as well that might come about when we're talking about a piece of technology, this bridge power that is natural gas powered in itself. Is the certain political reality and geopolitical reality that we're facing today, is that a challenge? Is it something that your team is thinking about? And maybe too, it would be interesting to hear your perspective as well on just why natural gas makes the most sense for something like this, why this is the solution that fits the best.
Yeah, we just don't see really anything else out short. Again, think back to that 3 to 4 year window you're trying to solve for today. So when you look at something you're trying to solve and build for today to be deployable in mid late 27, it's like, okay, what else can it be? I mean, I love the thoughts of SMRs or nuclear, but it's like, when is that really commercial? When can you really apply it? What other assets out there can you really apply today within that time frame that you can get permitted, works environmentally, available, commercial? You just come back to something it's in my opinion, right, it's driven by natural gas. Everything that I hear from the gas companies, there is no shortage of gas in the availability of gas in the U.S. I think they're running into some of the same problems that like the electric utilities are. Is like, how do you get it from where it is to where we need it?
Right.
So it's like, even jobs at transmission systems are fairly close by. I mean, the permitting and the right of ways and all the things you can go to can still be quite a challenge from a schedule perspective. But I think all the gas companies, like, we got gas, how do we think about new transmission and new pipelines, right, to get gas into some of these major locations?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think it's an important caveat in any conversation when we're talking about, what the generation reality looks like. But to your point, so much of this challenge is not necessarily about generation. It is about the transmission and distribution shortcomings. It's about the T&D. When we're thinking about that, the solutions we've talked about throughout this conversation to some of those shortcomings, I would love to hear just sort of big picture summary style. What do you think this tells us about maybe the future of distributed energy when we're dealing with a lot of these, large loads? It's sort of the large load reality of the environment we're in. How do you envision that future of distributed energy playing out?
Everything that we see and investing and planning for, in my years of doing this, I just continue to see a lot of continued growth and uptake for DERs and behind the meter applications because, it solves for a lot of the things that we just talked about. I think the grid has to continue to evolve of, large central top, generation assets to being, more nimble, more flexible behind the meter. I mean, it's a combination, right? But it's like, I think everything that we're seeing in the market, the data centers and the bridge power discussions is one discussion, but when you look at the overall health of our business, every vertical that we serve is growing, whether it's healthcare or retail or federal facilities, uh, and the ones that I'm leaving out. It's all the utilities that we serve. All of them are growing. And what's happened, the data center needs and all this load growth that we talked about initially is really, made the utilities think about in the interim, how do they incentivize customers, right, to have DERs that they're willing to pay for? So it's like, so all this time that they're investing to build new generation and new transmission. Well, if they can pay for customers, to build DERs and behind the meter assets at their facility to help alleviate that, they're willing to pay for that. And we're seeing the value of those programs and what utilities are willing to pay individual customers, just continue to rise and continue to get broader and broader across all utilities.
Yeah. And on this topic of what utilities are willing to spend, what they're willing to invest in, if you were, advising we could say either a utility CEO, a data center developer, really either end of the spectrum of this relationship we're talking about today, I would love to know what you think some of the initial questions should be that they're asking when they're thinking about bridge power, when they're thinking about solutions like what we've talked about from PowerSecure today. What would your advice be to those utility leaders or those data center developers who are trying to figure out where they go next, what the next solution should be? What would your advice be?
Yeah, from Jim's lens, it would be, we'd really like to see things move a lot quicker around the utilities providing, these incentives I just talked about, capacity programs to where, whether it's a hyperscaler or any large user, that, a certain amount of their load has to be a capacity resource. And what I mean by that is that they're investing in resources, right, that's behind the meter, DERs, we call them microgrids, that, can be deployed at the time of the need by the utility, but also serve as an emergency or a resiliency resource for the end user. And the utilities pay for that. And, for us, that unlocks a lot of available capacity on the utility system, right, that everybody wins from. So it's like, we need utilities, and we're seeing that, but we need to continue to see utilities provide, the assets that we can deliver today as capacity resources, and for the hyperscalers and the large users to continue to adopt and use it. And by doing that, it unlocks a lot of additional capacity. Maybe a data center comes into some state in the Southeast, and maybe they don't have 300 megawatts, but they've unlocked 100 megawatts today that they can use. And there's a lot of studies out there that there's a lot of existing capacity within the U.S. today that could be unlocked, right, if they would go down this path.
Yeah, I think it's such an important point, and one that I would love to make more frequently on the show too. When we're talking about something like this bridge power that can open up capacity, what else can that capacity accomplish for the entire economy, the global economy, right? It's not just the five biggest hyperscalers who need access to power. We're talking about needs across the economy, needs across the country, needs across the world, and having the best, most savviest way to deploy power, to get it where it needs to be, to use the right technology. opens up a lot of opportunities for everybody, which is, there's more to life and more to the electric grid and to the utility industry than just data centers. It's obviously a huge topic of conversation for a very obvious reason. But we have a lot of other factors, a lot of other needs, a lot of other industries that have, a seat at the table, I would say, in terms of the conversation around the future of our power industry. Well, Jim, thank you so much. We have covered a ton today, and I have loved learning more about what you and the team are working on. If you are ready, we will get into our lightning round right now. So if you don't mind, I would love if you could keep your answers to some of these quick questions to rapid fire style, just a couple of words or a sentence, and we'll close it out with a little bit of fun. So my first question for you, is there a common misconception about data centers and energy that you want to clear up here?
Modular resiliency products work, and let's continue to work on unlocking the capacity for it range.
All right. What is your favorite part about your job?
It's definitely our people, right? I mean, I love all the folks that we have, and I love the culture we have here at PowerSecure about solving solutions for our customers. Very customer centric.
Wonderful. And my final question for you, we were just kind of chatting about this, but data centers are obviously dominating energy headlines right now. I'm curious if you think there is another problem to solve in the future. As you look to the future, what are you anticipating will be the next data centers, if you will?
Yeah, probably not so much from the energy perspective, but I think the workforce and the skills, the trade skills that we need as a country out here to install and build all these solutions is something that's front and center for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely one we talk about a lot on the show, one we hear about a lot. So I appreciate it, Jim. Thank you so much for joining me today and for having this wonderful conversation. I learned so much. I'm sure our audience did as well. So I really appreciate you taking the time.
No, it's great. Thanks, Kinsey.
Of course. And thank you once again to our partners at PowerSecure. PowerSecure is the nation's leading provider of microgrids and energy solutions. With over 25 years of experience, PowerSecure has developed, installed, and managed more than 3 gigawatts of microgrid capacity and saved companies over $1 billion in energy efficiency upgrades. To learn more about PowerSecure and Bridge Power Solutions, visit the link in the show notes. And thank you so much once again for tuning in. We will see you next time here on Power Perspectives.